Welcome to your Daily 5 for Thursday, January 18th, 2024. I was reading an article that really kind of shocked me. I mean, it only really makes sense to me in one way, and even then, it doesn't really make sense to me, which was apparently Robert Downey Jr. was recently on Rob Lowe's Literally podcast, and he was talking about the fact that he feels like his performance as Tony Stark has largely been snubbed, I have to assume, by critics and industry people because of the genre that it's in, which is in the Marvel films. And I was sitting there and I was trying to figure out how that could possibly be because, and it's the only way it makes sense is that by people who I guess view films as some kind of sacred thing that only can be made by serious people and serious mindedness, which is just so stupid. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like serious, thoughtful, ponderous films too. Obviously, I've got a late night coming out with Solaris and Stalker being reviewed from the 70s, and neither of those are fast, funny films. But at the same time, the Marvel formula, and don't get me wrong, I've talked many times about the fact that I'm tired of it by now, but for a while there, it was the formula for making these movies. And you can still see its template and its influence everywhere. And you have to attribute a big portion of that to the success of Iron Man. Now, I would argue that Blade was every bit as important because it kind of laid the foundation for comic book movies being able to be serious and successful. And also, I would say, demonstrating why casting is so important. And that's something that you can argue about the quality of the films themselves and the villains being better or worse in certain films. But the first three big tentpole movies from Marvel, which would be Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, the casting is so vital to those movies being as good as they are and thereby contributing to the larger MCU success that I don't know how anybody could look at Robert Downey Jr.'s presence in these movies, and whether you like comic book movies or not, it's a significant role, and the success of the movie is at least, well, I wouldn't even say at least, that's the wrong way to phrase it. There's a major portion of that success that is tied directly to Downey Jr. himself. Obviously, Jon Favreau is important, and you have to have good direction. There's lots of ingredients into a good movie. But Tony Stark was so well cast in Robert Downey Jr. that it's very tough to think of another actor. Because you can think of other actors who can do roles, obviously. I mean, Timothy Dalton in his prime could have been Tony Stark. I can think of numerous people who, at the right time, right place, would have been as good, but not vastly better. I mean, sometimes you have roles where you think, would anybody else have been vastly better? And if you can't come up with somebody, and if you can think of anybody, tell me, but I can't imagine who it would be, then you have to credit that person, their performance in that role, with its due weight and significance. And if people think that his performance wasn't good because it was a comic book movie, well, that says more about the way that people are evaluating movies, because it shouldn't all be one type of movie. And maybe that's what he was sort of saying when he was talking about this. Maybe he can't come out right out and say it because, of course, he's part of the industry and you're not going to blacklist yourself for no good reason. So maybe this was a kind of stealth way of commenting on the way films are evaluated, in which case I totally agree with him. But again, I don't know. I'm struggling to think of how you don't have the Marvel films, their golden age of Marvel films, or at least one of them, because it could come around again, who knows. But basically how you go to Endgame with all the build-up and everything paying off there, and don't see a direct reliance on Iron Man working to make that all happen. And part of Iron Man working has to be acknowledged as Robert Downey Jr.'s casting. It's exceptionally good casting. So I don't know exactly where this comes from. Again, maybe it is a shadow way of criticizing the way that movies are evaluated, because obviously comic book movies, as well as horror movies and some other genre films, are not usually ones you see up for Oscars very often, unless they're presented as prestige films, Exorcist-style films. But usually if you're in a comic book or a horror movie, you're not going to expect to get an Oscar nomination, because that's just not seen as quality filmmaking, I guess, by the people who make these decisions. So if that's what he's talking about, then I can see it, because there is a bias clearly against genre film when it comes to serious awards and recognition. But if he somehow thinks that people don't understand how important Iron Man was to comic book films in general, then wow, I don't know what he's been reading, but I could not disagree more. So yeah, read the link to this article here. Let me know what you think. Later.